You did not become cold. You became tired of translating pain for someone who only listened for a way to dismiss it. For a long time, you believed one more careful explanation might change everything. You searched for gentler words. You removed the anger from your voice. You softened the truth until it could barely bruise anyone. You replayed conversations late at night, wondering whether you had spoken too soon, too sharply, or with too much emotion. You thought clarity would save the connection. So you kept explaining. You explained why the silence hurt. You explained why the inconsistency was exhausting. You explained why being ignored after conflict felt different from needing space. You explained that you were not asking for perfection. You were asking for something stable enough that your body could stop bracing for the next withdrawal. And every time the conversation ended, you felt less certain of your own reality. That was the hidden cost. You were not only trying to be understood, you were slowly being trained to distrust the part of you that knew something was wrong. Then one day, something changed. You stopped reaching for the perfect sentence. You stopped trying to prove that your pain was real. You went quiet, not because nothing mattered, because too much had mattered for too long. People often misunderstand this kind of silence. They call it detachment. They call it avoidance. They call it giving up. Sometimes it is one of those things, but sometimes silence is what happens when your nervous system finally recognizes that the conversation has become another place where you abandon yourself. You have probably lived through the smaller moments first. You mention something that hurt you, and they answer with a technicality. They focus on the exact word you used instead of the pattern you are naming. They tell you that your timing is inconvenient. They say you are making the situation bigger than it is. They turn your reaction into the entire subject and leave their behavior untouched. By the end, you are explaining your explanation. That is how exhaustion enters the relationship, not all at once. Quietly, you become the person responsible for bringing evidence into a courtroom that moves every time you enter it. You prepare your case more carefully. You anticipate objections. You remove anything they could interpret as accusation. You speak in a voice designed to sound calm enough to be believed. But your calmness does not create safety. It only makes the dismissal easier to survive. You became fluent in explaining feelings to someone who benefited from misunderstanding them. That is not communication. That is emotional labor without emotional reciprocity. Attachment theory, first developed through the work of John Bowlby and expanded through Mary Ainsworth's research, offers one way to understand why this can become so consuming. In plain English, attachment patterns shape how people seek safety when closeness feels uncertain. When connection feels unstable, some people reach harder for repair. They ask more questions. They search for the sentence that will finally restore contact. That may have been you. You were not trying to win an argument. You were trying to return the relationship to a place where your nervous system could rest. This is not weakness. It is an adaptation. When the person in front of you becomes distant, vague, or emotionally unavailable, your mind may start scanning for the mistake that caused the shift. You review your tone. You reread messages. You wonder whether you asked for too much. You begin to manage the conversation before it even happens. You call it overthinking, but often it is a form of relational hypervigilance. Hypervigilance means your attention becomes organized around the possibility of threat. In a relationship, the threat is not always shouting or obvious cruelty. Sometimes it is the sudden drop in warmth, the delayed reply after intimacy, the coldness that appears after you name a need, the way affection becomes available again only after you minimize yourself. Your body learns the pattern before your mind admits it. That is why you can feel the room change before anyone says a word. You notice the pause. You notice the shift in their face. You notice the silence between ordinary sentences. You notice what they refuse to name. But here is what you still have not seen. The more often you explain yourself inside an emotionally unreceptive relationship, the more the explanation can stop being an act of expression and become an act of self-erasure. You start editing out the parts of your experience they dislike hearing. You describe your pain in ways that protect them from discomfort. You make your needs smaller because smaller needs appear more reasonable. You become so committed to being fair that you forget fairness must include you. You were not asking for too much. You were carrying too much. There is another psychological concept that matters here: cognitive dissonance, associated with Leon Festinger. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort created when two truths feel difficult to hold at the same time. In plain English, your mind struggles when someone says they care about you while repeatedly responding to your pain as though it is an inconvenience. The contradiction is expensive. You can reduce that discomfort in several ways. You can recognize that their words and their behavior do not match. Or you can search for a new explanation that protects the relationship from the truth. Maybe they are stressed. Maybe you chose the wrong moment. Maybe your history makes you too sensitive. Maybe you need to explain it one more time, but better. And because you are capable of empathy, you can always find a reason. Empathy becomes dangerous when it is used to explain away evidence. Understanding is not the same as safety. Compassion is not the same as consent. You can understand why someone withdraws and still recognize what repeated withdrawal does to you. You can understand their childhood and still tell the truth about your adulthood. You can acknowledge their fear of conflict without accepting a relationship where every difficult conversation becomes your punishment. This distinction matters because you may have spent years mistaking your ability to understand them for proof that you should keep enduring the pattern. You became loyal to their potential and disloyal to your own pain, and the pattern may not have started with them. Long before this relationship, you may have learned that emotional safety depended on reading the room correctly. Maybe a caregiver became quiet when disappointed. Maybe affection was present but unpredictable. Maybe there was no dramatic event, only a household where everyone's feelings mattered except yours. You learned to detect tension before it became visible. You learned to become useful, easy, mature, careful. A child cannot say, "The emotional environment around me is inconsistent." A child says, "I need to become easier to love." That decision can follow you for decades. It may look like patience. It may look like emotional intelligence. It may look like your remarkable ability to see every side of the story. But underneath it, there can be a private bargain. If you explain yourself gently enough, ask carefully enough, and understand them deeply enough, you will not be abandoned. You were not born needing to over-explain. You learned that being misunderstood was dangerous. The stress response also matters. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, usually shortened to the HPA axis, is part of the body's system for responding to stress. In plain English, when the body anticipates threat, it mobilizes energy so you can respond. In an inconsistent relationship, the threat may be emotional rather than physical, but the body can still begin anticipating the next rupture. That anticipation changes the meaning of conversation. You are no longer discussing one event. You are trying to prevent the next withdrawal. You are trying to stop the emotional temperature from dropping. You are trying to make yourself understandable enough that closeness will not disappear again. This is why you may rehearse conversations in the shower. It is why your chest tightens when you see a certain expression on their face. It is why a short message can occupy your mind for hours. The words are small, but they arrive inside a body that has learned to expect consequences. There is a reason this can feel so lonely, even when you are still together. Social baseline theory, associated with the work of James Cone and colleagues, proposes that human beings do not regulate stress in isolation by default. In plain English, reliable connection can reduce the amount of effort your brain expects you to carry alone. A safe relationship does not eliminate difficulty, but it changes the burden of difficulty. Your body learns that repair is possible. It does not have to remain on watch every hour of the day. But when the person you reach for is also the person you must prepare for, closeness stops functioning as a place of rest. You may sit beside them and still feel alone. You may share a bed and still monitor the emotional weather. You may hear them say that everything is fine while your body remains unconvinced. That is not because your body is irrational. It may be responding to repetition. Words say safety. The pattern says caution. And when those signals conflict often enough, the pattern usually becomes louder. You were carrying the relationship and the alarm system at the same time. Stay with this, because the next part changes the meaning. Eventually, repeated failed attempts at repair can produce something that resembles learned helplessness. The concept emerged from research on what happens when effort repeatedly fails to change an aversive situation. It should not be used as a diagnosis for your relationship, but as a framework, it can clarify the emotional shift. When nothing you say reliably improves the outcome, your system may stop investing energy in trying. At first, you explain more. Then you explain differently. Then you explain with fewer words. Then you begin to notice that your body feels heavy before the conversation even starts. Finally, you say, "It is fine." Not because it is fine, because you no longer believe the truth will be handled with care. That is the part people miss when they call your silence cruel. The silence did not begin when you stopped talking. It began when speaking stopped feeling meaningful. You may still have words. You may still know exactly what happened. You may still be able to describe the entire pattern with painful precision, but you are no longer willing to hand your inner world to someone who repeatedly turns it into a debate. This is not punishment. This is not manipulation. This is not a performance designed to make them chase you. Sometimes it is cumulative emotional overload. Cumulative emotional overload is what happens when the nervous system is asked to process too many unresolved emotional demands without enough repair. In plain English, one more conversation is not experienced as one more conversation. It carries the weight of every conversation that ended with you feeling unseen. The unfinished moments stack. the apology that changed nothing, the tenderness that arrived only after you started pulling away, the promise that lasted until the next uncomfortable truth, the way you felt hopeful after every calm conversation and foolish after every repeated pattern. You were not exhausted by one misunderstanding. You were exhausted by the requirement to keep proving that the pattern existed. This is why your silence may feel strange even to you. Part of you is relieved. Part of you feels guilty. Part of you wonders whether you have become emotionally unavailable. Part of you misses the version of yourself who believed every conflict could be repaired with enough honesty. But here is the truth that explains the entire cycle. You did not lose your ability to communicate. You lost your willingness to keep communicating against evidence. There is grief in that, because over-explaining was not only a habit, it was hope wearing itself down in public. Every carefully worded message contained a quiet belief that this time they might finally understand. Every late-night conversation held the possibility that the relationship could become the place you kept trying to make it. Letting go of the explanation means grieving the fantasy that the right words could create mutuality where mutuality was repeatedly absent. That grief can feel like failure. It is not failure. It is recognition. You may have learned very early that your job was to preserve connection, even if preserving it required you to disappear inside it. Perhaps you became the child who could sense everyone else's needs before they were spoken. Perhaps praise arrived when you were calm, helpful, forgiving, and undemanding. Perhaps your distress created discomfort in the people around you, so you learned to present pain only after editing out anything inconvenient. You became emotionally articulate because you had to be. But emotional articulation cannot force emotional availability. That sentence may be difficult to accept because it removes the last illusion of control. As long as the problem is your wording, you still have a task. You can improve your delivery. You can choose the right moment. You can explain the context more clearly. You can try again. When you recognize that the other person may not be willing or able to meet you there, the project ends. And the ending can feel emptier than the struggle. Struggle kept you occupied. Recognition leaves you alone with the truth. The hardest part is not realizing they misunderstood you. The hardest part is realizing they may have understood enough. They may have understood that you were hurting. They may have understood what you needed. They may have understood that silence, deflection, or inconsistency would keep the relationship arranged around their comfort. And whether that happened consciously or not, the effect on you was the same. You kept shrinking your truth to preserve a connection that required your confusion. The relationship did not break when you stopped talking. It broke every time your truth became the price of peace. There is a particular kind of loneliness in realizing that the conflict was never only about your delivery. You could become calmer, clearer, more patient, and more precise. You could remove every sharp edge from your voice. But if the relationship depended on your silence, every honest sentence would still sound dangerous to the person benefiting from the arrangement. That is why your final quiet may feel different. It is not empty. It contains every sentence you no longer need to repeat, defend, soften, or prove again. Relief is not the same as repair. A calm week after a painful conversation is not necessarily repair. A tender message is not necessarily repair. A moment of closeness after distance is not necessarily repair. Repair requires a pattern that can hold truth without punishing the person who speaks it. You were not difficult to understand. You were difficult to keep ignoring once you understood yourself. That is why silence can become a turning point. Not the dramatic silence that waits to be noticed. The quiet silence that no longer asks permission to trust what it already knows. This does not mean you stop speaking everywhere. It does not mean every relationship deserves distance. It does not mean silence is always wise. It means your voice begins to belong to you again. You stop spending it in rooms where the only acceptable version of your truth is the version that asks for nothing. Neuroplasticity is the brain's capacity to change through repeated experience. In plain English, patterns learned through repetition can also be revised through repetition. Not instantly, not through one powerful realization, but through experiences where your inner reality is not treated as a problem to solve or a threat to manage. Earned security is a useful attachment concept here. It refers to the possibility that a person can develop a more secure way of relating even if earlier relationships were inconsistent. In plain English, the past can shape your reflexes without owning your future. The change may begin quietly. You notice the urge to over-explain. You notice the old panic when someone does not understand immediately. You notice the temptation to produce more evidence. And then you recognize that your truth does not become more real because someone else finally approves it. You are allowed to trust the pattern. You are allowed to stop presenting your pain for cross-examination. You are allowed to notice when a conversation is no longer a conversation. That does not make you cruel. It makes you honest. The child in you once believed that connection depended on perfect interpretation. They learned to study faces, soften sentences, and anticipate withdrawal because those strategies helped them preserve closeness. That child was not weak. That child was intelligent. That child adapted. But you are no longer required to spend your adulthood proving that your feelings deserve a place in the room. You can understand the pattern without continuing the cycle. You can feel compassion without volunteering for erasure. You can speak clearly without explaining yourself into exhaustion. And when silence comes, let it be clean, not a weapon, not a test, not a plea disguised as distance. Let it be the moment you stop arguing with what your body has known for years. You did not become cold. You stopped abandoning yourself. That is the difference.